My name is Kate Pickett Irving. I am a program administrator for the Enterprise Zone program, and I'm here with my counterpart, Mandy Archer, who's another program administrator. Let's go ahead and jump on into our workshop. Please hold your questions to the end. We will accept them during specific time at the end of our presentation, and there'll be plenty of time for that. We'll also be sending out this presentation and the webinar recording after the webinar, so you'll have that too. And let's go ahead and get started. Thank you. Here's our Virginia Enterprise Zone map. You can see that there are 45 zones throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, as far west as Wise County Zone and as far east as the Accomack and Northampton zones on the eastern shore. The Enterprise Zone area includes 21 cities, 34 counties, and 12 towns. Last year was grant year 2024. We want to share some of the data from that grant year. There were 36 job creation grants awarded and 117 real property investment grants awarded. There were 2,957 net new jobs created and over $1.82 million in job creation grant funds awarded. Over $231 million of private investment funds were leveraged for those real property investment grants, and over $11.86 million in RPIG funds were awarded, for a total of over $13.68 million in total funds dispersed by our program. Here's our program timeline. The Virginia Enterprise Zone grants are a little bit different from other state grant incentives. So the 2025 General Assembly session happened last year at this time, and funds were appropriated for the current grant year that we are in. Our grant year is called Grant Year 2025 because it's for calendar year 2025. That means that it includes, for the job creation grant, new jobs created in 2025. And for the real property investment grant, it includes projects for which the final placed in service document was received anytime in calendar year 2025. So grant year 2025 applications are due this April 1st, 2026, and you will hear us give you that reminder multiple times in this presentation. A brief overview. The agreed upon procedures for these grants test and report on the assertion of a business or qualified zone investor as to their qualification to receive the Enterprise Zone grants. These procedures are reported in the CPA attestation report, and it's a requirement for all real property investment grants and most job creation grants. The CPA must be independent of the company and currently licensed in Virginia or a state with reciprocity. The CPA agreed upon procedures attestation report must be submitted by April 1st, 2026 deadline. Findings must be reported on the required forms, and the form and the use of the forms have the support of the Virginia Society of CPAs. Do not retype the procedures or submit findings using another document than what has been provided by DHCD unless you have approval. And the attestation report forms for both grants are available for download on our submission system site under the CPA attestation report header. And we'll go over that when we look at the portal. Findings. Reports submitted that do not state the findings for each procedure are considered incomplete. The AICPA professional standards set forth in Section AT 201.25 states that the practitioner should report all findings from the application of the agreed upon procedures. Furthermore, the next section specifies that a practitioner should avoid vague or ambiguous language and report findings. And there are examples of appropriate and inappropriate descriptions of findings that can be found within Section AT 201.26. Based on the professional standards set forth, providing one's initials solely and/or solely no findings by each procedure does not constitute an adequate description of the findings. Example. So there's a space on the CPA attestation report that says that the CPA shall inquire of the source of all grant monies used to fund the qualified real property investment by obtaining management representation to determine that federal, state, and local source grants of public funds were not used to purchase items on the schedule of qualified real property investments. The response should not solely be the CPA's initials or no findings or no exemptions, but something to the effect of no grant monies were utilized for this project, or company received $3,500 in local grants. That amount was listed in the application and subtracted from the total qualified real property investments. I like to tell people, when you're doing these findings, think about when you were in school and you would answer your teacher's question by restating the question, just like in this response. All applications and attachments, including the CPA attestation reports, are submitted through the system no later than 11:59 p.m. on April 1st. Applications without the required attestation will be considered incomplete and late. And if submitting more than one application, each application and associated materials must be submitted separately. You'll receive 3 application confirmations. The first is a successful submission of the online application. The second may be a notification of deficiencies. We have a certain amount of time to look at the grants and do a first and second review. So that's in April and May. And during that time, if we find any deficiencies, errors, things that need to be updated or changed or missing, we will contact both the CPA and the grant applicant, make you aware of those deficiencies and help you correct those deficiencies so that the grant can be approved. And then third, a notification of the resolution of the grant deficiencies. Now Mandy Archer is going to give us the Real Property Investment Grant CPA agreed upon procedures.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks everybody for joining us today. So moving on into specifications for the Real Property Investment Grant agreed upon procedures. So just as a reminder to everyone joining us, the Real Property Investment Grant applicant does have responsibilities. The zone investor does have to provide the CPA with various information so that they can perform the attestation. So since the Real Property Investment Grant information is required to be completed through an online application and the required materials are uploaded, we do provide a sample application page that can be downloaded and used for the purpose of the CPA to review all the information before it is uploaded. That document is not required to be uploaded. It is simply for a check of all the information, getting everything in one place, sort of like just getting your packet together before you're going to upload it. The applicant is also responsible for making sure the CPA has all invoices, receipts, and proofs of payment of qualified real property investments being capitalized or expensed, and the final place and service documentation issued for the completed qualified real property investments. They also have additional responsibilities in the case of, supplemental information or documents. So for mixed use buildings, the applicant does need to make sure they are providing the measured drawings for the building indicating the square footage and use of the building. For zone investors applying as owners of space within a building, they would need to include closing documents or deed of trust indicating the building square footage. And for zone investors applying as tenants, the current lease agreement indicating the building square footage as well. The CPA attestation responsibility. So the attestation should report on all of the following information. All the required attachments are completed, including the supplemental documents. The zone investor did only include qualified real property investments, and that all costs listed were either capitalized or expensed by the zone investor. So the list excludes any qualified real property that was funded from public grants, federal, state, or local sources. If it is included, there is a location that needs to be subtracted on the application itself. And so the CPA will attest to what was done during that process. Also, the real property for which the investments were made, that the place and service documentation is for the applicable grant year, which is 2025. Additional responsibilities include on the report about the mixed use buildings, that the square footage information and use is accurately indicated and that it meets the requirements of mixed use, and that zone investors that own space within a building or zone investors applying as tenants, they must also have the square footage information accurately indicated on those supplemental forms, and the CPA will attest to that. So let's go through those procedures very quickly, or time. So procedure 1 is an attestation of the completed documents and application information. So the CPA is going to attest to the completion and signing of the Commonwealth of Virginia W-9, as well as the local zone administrator form and the applicant declaration form, all to be completed by the applicant. And also attest to the copy of the final place and service documentation, and that the physical address is the same as the application, and the approval or the issuance date is within the calendar year 2025. If there is a difference on the place and service documentation, that will be included in the description, also on the application, and through the attestation process. Continuing on with procedure 1, completed, signed, and notarized supplemental forms, and these are if applicable, of course. So they will attest to them being the mixed use form, the multiple owner form, the tenant owner consent, or the tenant coordination. If they're using any of those forms, will attest to the completion signature and that they are notarized as appropriate. Moving on to procedure 2. This is where the CPA will read the schedule of qualified real property investments, that is all invoices, receipts, contracts, etc. Determine that only qualified real property investments are listed in the application, and just making sure that they're associated with the allowable QRPI, which is of course the exterior, interior, structural, mechanical, electrical improvements, all those hard construction costs associated with the expansion or rehab of a building or facility, or the new build of that. Also can include excavations, grading, paving, installing, landscape or land improvements. Continuing on into procedure 2, in the case of cost categories listed on the schedule. So if you include more than includes more than one type of work, such as drywall and demolition, the breakdown of the work included in such category will be obtained by the CPA and read to ensure all cost categories are qualified real property investments. The CPA will also report on any items that qualifications are uncertain, including the exact dollar amount on that. And the CPA will also compare the schedule of qualified real property to the general ledger entries for the applicant, just to determine that the items and costs listed on the schedule were charges to the appropriate capital account or expense account. So just to confirm, the CPA does need to read and obtain and read 100% of all the invoices and receipts, if it's an AIA report or any other relevant documentation of construction expenses and proof of payment. So the CPA will compare these documents to the dollar values presented on the schedule of qualified real property investment submitted to you by the applicant, and make sure that those charges agree. The CPA will also obtain and read parts of the QRPI, the RPIG application, and the contents of their attestation report, just to determine whether the total qualified real property reported on the application meets the applicable minimum investment threshold. And also they will inquire the source of any grant monies used and make sure that that is either not included in the QRPI or that it is subtracted on that application, and attest to that. Procedure 3 involves the place in service documentation. So the CPA does read all of the place in service documentation and make sure, which indicates the work is complete and up to code, as evidence. So Anne wants to make sure the place in service date indicates the calendar year, in this case 2025, which the zone investor is applying for the grant. The CPA will confirm that the place in service is final. It does not indicate temporary or pending or any type of upcoming final place things that need to happen if something were to be postponed. In that case, the applicant would need to wait until they receive the final place in service documentation and apply in that appropriate year. So in cases in which the final place in service documentation was only for a portion of the building or facility, the CPA will read those qualified real property investment amounts to determine that it only includes work completed on the portion covered by the place in service documentation. Right here, this is just continuing that final place in service documentation. When the service doc is a final CO, we do kind of have a little bit of a screenshot from City of Roanoke, what that looks like. And so the CPA will compare the physical address on the final CO to the address on the application and make sure they match. They will also read that final CO, determine the date of issuance is within the appropriate calendar year, and that it is final, not temporary or pending. If there is a shell CO, the CPA will read the application, determine the zone investor is not a tenant of the building, unless they have signed that capital lease agreement or coordinated with building owners. And also the CPA will read that final CO to determine the name listed matches the name on the application. And if not, the CPA will determine that required explanation is included as part of that. So making sure that everything matches up, that either the tax map matches information with what's the tax ID or tax map number on the application. So again, we do provide an opportunity if for some reason something is different, which has happened. But if there are questions about that and how to explain that and make that piece together, please contact us or reach out to us. This is in the case where it's a final building inspection. So a lot of localities, it's a final CO. Especially if there was a change of usage, this might be a final building inspection. If there was no change of usage or if it was an expansion. In these cases, this may be where the building was in continual service during that rehab or expansion. So the CPA will read the final building inspection, determine the physical address matches the physical address on the application. Again, making sure the date of issuance is within that appropriate year of 2025. And also read the final building inspection report to determine the final inspection is marked as approved and not pending or temporary. If there are multiple inspections, must determine that all of them are fully approved or passed. In some cases, a building may have an inspection for the mechanical or the HVAC, or they might the electrical. So they may have had more than one final inspection as that building is being built. And so we want to make sure that that final building, that final inspection is marked as approved and in the appropriate calendar year of grant year. CPA will also read the final building inspection, determine that the name listed matches the name of the zone investor. And again, if not, the CPA will determine the required explanation is included for the application. This is when when place in service documentation is provided by a third-party licensed inspector's report. Again, this is only eligible whenever the building or the qualified real property investment does not require any type of building permit. So in cases where the locality did not require a building permit or other permits for any of the work listed on the qualified real property investment schedule, the CPA will read an official letter from the building code official, which is required to be submitted, to determine that it references the physical address and states that such permits were not required. They will also read that third-party inspector's report, so both of those things are required, to determine that the address and report on the report matches the address of the application. That third-party inspector's report does have to be dated in the appropriate grant calendar year. So the CPA is going to read that third-party inspector's report, determine the date of the report was issued within the appropriate calendar year, and also determine that it indicates that all work was complete in that calendar year with no outstanding or failed items. And again, the CPA will read the third-party inspector's report to make sure that the name listed on that matches the name of the application. If not, again, determine the required explanation is included. So procedure 4 has to do with the attestation of square footage for mixed use. Of course, this is applicable if the rehab, expansion, or new construction is for a mixed use building. So the CPA will first determine if the application has indicated they are mixed use and that they are providing the supplemental mixed use form. The CPA will check part 2 of that form to make sure it's been completed by the preparer of the measure drawings and plans, and those check that contains the professional seal or notarized signature of the preparer, if not an architect. So if no formal drawings were required by the locality or the zone investor prepared their own measure drawings, the CPA will determine that a licensed third-party architect or contractor has signed and sealed the form, certifying that at least 30% of the usable floor space in the building is devoted to commercial, industrial, or office use. So they would still need to have that reviewed by architect or contractor. And then the CPA will review that for attestation purposes. Again, if applicable, the attestation of multiple owners in the space. When their building has multiple owners of space in a building or facility, that could be a condo or something of that nature, the CPA will determine the square footage information indicated in the closing documents or deed of trust is accurately indicated on the supplemental form that's required. The CPA will also determine the zone investor's coordinated qualification with all other owners of the building. Otherwise, DHCD's proration procedures will be used. They will also determine that if the applicant has indicated they own space in a building, such as office condo, that the correct supplemental form has been completed and signed. And in addition, the CPA should compare the form to any backup documentation provided by the applicant, such as closing documents or deed of trust, and report on those findings. Sorry. So the CPA will also determine that the math is correct in the supplemental forms. They will also determine the information of the supplemental form agrees with the grant requested by the zone investor on the EZ-RPIG application, indicating that either the grant request is being prorated or has been coordinated with all other owners in the building. And in the case of coordination, the CPA will determine that all the building and facility square footage has been accounted for by the other owner's notarized signatures, so such that the sum of the square feet listed on that application equals out. If applicable for the attestation of tenants in a building, when an applicant firm is a tenant in a building or facility, the CPA must determine that the square footage information indicated in the current lease agreement is accurately indicated on the tenant owner consent form. The CPA, the zone investor, must provide the CPA with the lease. And the purpose of this is to ensure the zone investor has obtained the consent of the building owner, and if required by the owner, has coordinated qualification with any other tenants of the building. Otherwise, again, DHCD's proration procedures will be used. So the CPA will determine that the applicant has indicated tenant in building, then the supplemental form has been completed and the applicant has provided the valid lease that agrees with the form. Continue on for this particular scenario, the CPA will determine on the application of the in part 4 and 5 of the supplemental form have been completed, whereby the owner of for the grant. And also the CPA will determine that part 3 is mathematically correct. The CPA will also determine that the supplemental form agrees with the grant requested by the zone investor in the application, And that indicates that the grant request is either being prorated, has been coordinated with all other owners, tenants within the building, or the owner has given consent without requiring coordination. So that is the real property investment grant information. I'm going to go ahead and I'm sorry. That is the real property investment grant attestation agreed upon procedures. I'm going to turn it over to Kate now for the CPA portion. I'm sorry, job creation grant portion.
You're right. It's the CPA's job creation grant portion. So let's go ahead and jump into those agreed upon procedures for the job creation grant. Some of those, of course, will be similar to those for the RPIG, but there will be some differences. First, we want to go over the attestation exemption. So as provided in section 59.1-547 of the Code of Virginia, business firms with base year employment of 100 or fewer permanent full-time positions that create 25 or fewer grant eligible positions are exempt from the attestation requirement for that qualification year. If a firm is exempt from the attestation report, they must submit the job creation grant worksheet with their application. And the worksheet must be completed each year the firm seeks that qualification for JCG, regardless of whether or not the attestation report is required. That is on here because in the past we did not require it every year, but we do now. So be sure that you have that JCG worksheet for us to review. JCG applicant responsibilities. These are things that the business firm or grant applicant must provide to the CPA for the CPA to be able to complete these agreed upon procedures. The first is that JCG standard worksheet or the JCG HUA SWAM worksheet. And that includes all of the employees filling the permanent full-time positions in the base year in alphabetical order, followed by all the employees filling permanent full-time positions in the grant year in alphabetical order. Failure to provide a completed and accurate list of all employees, the dates they were employed, and their wage rates could result in an under or overpayment. And in that case of an overpayment, then the Commonwealth would require the grantee to return an overpayment to the Treasury of Virginia. Employees receiving raises or even decreases in pay, so any change in pay within the grant year, must be listed on a separate line for each wage fluctuation. You cannot use the average wage rate or the ending wage rate to represent annual wages. So in that worksheet, you would have, for instance, my name or the employee's name, you would have Kate Pickett Irving, and then the time of during the grant year in which I was at the one wage. And then you would have me listed a second time with my name and then the months and then for the time that was listed at the second wage rate. And then we would figure out that based on the worksheet calculations. All I-9s, pay stubs, and payroll records indicating the first work date, last work date, and wage rates in the base year and grant year for all employees listed on the worksheet must be submitted. All health benefits documentation must be submitted to the CPA. That includes written benefit waivers that are signed by the employees. And business firm representatives must provide their signature on the applicant declaration form. And this verifies that no retail, food or beverage, or personal service positions are listed on the worksheet. All employees are permanent full-time positions and have not been churned from another location within the Commonwealth. And all employees listed on the worksheet, both for grant year and base year, meet the report to work requirement. The JCG attestation procedures are structured to ensure that the company is not submitting wages and information for those employees that are personal service, food or beverage, or retail establishments, because those are prohibited. The company only includes permanent full-time positions in the base year and the grant year, and that the wage rates for the net new equivalent permanent to full-time positions in the grant year are accurate, as well as employment dates and wage rates for the positions listed on the worksheet are accurate and identical to those found in the payroll information and the personnel documentation. Procedure 1 is the attestation regarding prohibited positions. The CPA will read the NAICS code listed on the online application or sample application to determine that that code is one other than the codes for those prohibited positions. If a business is not a retail business but has retail positions, the firm is eligible for JCGs, but only positions that are not retail, food, beverage, or personal service can be included on the worksheet for the purposes of qualifying for the JCG. Procedure 2 is attestation of permanent full-time positions on the worksheet. The CPA will follow the sampling procedure explained that we're about to go over, um, and the worksheet for employees filling out those positions during the base year and the grant year. The CPA will report the applicable procedure that was followed in establishing sampling. So we're going to go over those rules for sampling now. As a reminder, all of this is in the CPA agreed upon procedures manual. Rules for sampling. So firms with 100 or fewer employees that are filling permanent full-time positions, the CPA will obtain a random sample of the documentation for 20 permanent full-time employees on the worksheet and read to ensure that the start and end work dates for those employees agree without exception to the information provided on the payroll records using sampling techniques. If there are 20 or fewer PFTPs, the documentation and worksheet calculations for all employees will be included in the CPA's sample. Firms with more than 100 employees filling those permanent full-time positions will obtain a random sampling of payroll records and health benefits documentation for 20% of all employees shown on the worksheet. The CPA will read to ensure that the start and end work dates for those employees agree without exception to the information provided using random sampling techniques. That random sampling will be based on the use of a table of random numbers. The CPA will first assign each employee listed on the worksheet a unique identification number. Then the CPA will select cases for the 20 employees or the 20% sample when their identification number corresponds to the number chosen from the random sampling table. The CPA will indicate in column B of the worksheet which employees have been selected to be sampled. The CPA will stop selecting cases when they've reached the sample size. And if an identification number is selected more than once, then you will ignore the repeats and go on to the next sample. For non-reconciled errors, if the CPA finds any non-reconcilable errors, any unexplained difference between the information on the documents provided, the payroll records, and what is entered on the worksheet in the sample population, then the CPA should repeatedly select 20 employees or 20% sample from the original population until the subsequent sample produces no non-reconcilable errors. The CPA shall submit by name any non-reconcilable errors found during the procedure in the attestation report. If the client chooses to revise the worksheet and application to remove the non-reconcilable items, the CPA will read to ensure that the revised worksheet has omitted those non-reconcilable items and that there are no resulting changes from the original worksheet. Procedure 3, attestation of the required documentation. For each employee from that sample from that sample population, the CPA will compare the worksheet for both base and grant year employees with the information listed on the documents, those I-9s, the payroll records, and health benefits enrollment information. In the case of a business in a qualification year other than its first year, the sample should only include the grant year information, not the base year information or previous years. The base year employment should only be sampled in the first grant year along with grant year employment. Continued. I-9s. The CPA will obtain the sample population I-9s to determine base and or grant year employee's name, social security number, address, and start date of employment. In cases where the I-9 was signed prior to the actual hire date, for example, required as part of the job application, the CPA will read and compare the I-9 in conjunction with the supporting employee payroll documentation and attest to the hire date of the employee. Payroll records for the base year and the grant year employees shall be provided. That includes first and last payroll records for the time the employee worked in both the base year and/or the grant year. The CPA will compare the employee's name and employee number where assigned with information included on the worksheet. Read and compare records to attest that the first and last work date for each employee within the base year or grant year correspond to those dates listed for that employee on the worksheet, and compare the wage rates as indicated on the first and last payroll records for those sampled employees hired in the grant year. That includes net new employees, with the specific wage rates listed in column O of the worksheet, and report any differences. And going back to comparing the name and employee number, some people do not want to put an employee social security number on the form. You can assign them an employee number on the worksheet instead. Continued. If an employee received raises or a decrease in pay during the grant year, they have to be listed separate line for each wage fluctuation. Cannot use the average wage or the ending wage rate. The CPA will read the worksheet and determine that employees with wage fluctuations have been listed as many times as payroll records show wage fluctuations. For sampled employees with informations in columns P, Q, R, and/or S of the worksheet, the CPA will read the employment documentation to determine that the employees reflected on the worksheet are permanent and full-time. If the sampled employee's wage rate was converted from salary to hourly, the CPA will determine that it is mathematically correct by dividing the annual salary inclusive of shift premium and commissions by 1,820 hours. Health benefits information. The CPA will obtain and read the signed health benefits enrollment agreements and compare insurance coverage materials indicating employer contribution to payroll documents indicating employee contribution. The CPA will also compare the individual employee information on these documents to the information presented in column N of the worksheet, indicating that the employee was offered those health benefits, and for which wages are listed in column O, as such employees are net new over the base year employment, and report on the findings. The CPA should report all instances where the firm does not offer to contribute to at least 50% of the cost of the health insurance premium, because that would be an ineligible position. For employees filling grant eligible permanent full-time positions that have declined that health insurance coverage, the CPA will obtain and read the employee's signed waiver of health benefits. For firms that self-insure their employees' medical claims, a copy of the firm's policy signed by the employee, which with wages listed in column O, is acceptable documentation. If a business does not make health insurance benefits available for new permanent full-time employees until after a 90-day period, then that initial 90-day employment period during which benefits are not available can be included in the worksheet. The firm should list the first date and the last date that the employee filling the position met the wage requirement for those employees whose health benefits were effective after a specified employment period, provided they were offered by the start date. So if you have a company that follows this rule and they do not make health insurance benefits available until after a 90-day employment period or even a 60-day employment period, yes, they can include the initial 90 days in the worksheet if that employee is still employed after that initial time period without benefits. If the employee doesn't make it through that whole time period without being offered the benefits at the end of it, then they cannot be included on the worksheet. Moving on to procedure 4, the attestation of grant eligible positions with qualifying wage rates and health benefits. The CPA will read the qualification information on Part 2 of the online application or the sample application page to compare whether the information entered on Part 2, boxes 4A through B, and boxes 5E through F corresponds with those auto-calculated values on the worksheet, including B3 through B6, and indicate any discrepancies that are found in the report. That is a lot of information. This is a reminder that all of this information is in our CPA agreed upon procedures manual. We will be sending out this presentation, the PowerPoint, and the recording of the webinar to all registrants of this webinar in the next few days or so. And now is the time for you to ask any questions you may have. You can put those questions in the chat, or if you use the raise your hand feature, we'll call on you and you can ask your question on video. What questions do you have at this time? Not seeing anyone yet. I want to give another minute or so. Any questions? Mandy has put our email address, the ezone at dhcd.virginia.gov account in the chat. Feel free to copy and paste that so that you have it. I did forget to announce at the beginning, so I will announce now that we will be having some open office hours within the next few months leading up to grant submission time. And that will be a time where we'll have a meeting link that is the same every week, and it's the same time and day of the week. And Mandy and I will be on here waiting for anyone who wants to jump on and ask any questions. It will be open for CPAs, LZAs, grant applicants, anyone who might have questions about applying for the grants. Last call for any questions. I'm not seeing any, so I want to say thank you so much for your time, for joining us today. And please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. We're here to assist and happy to do so. And we hope you have a great day. Thank you. Can you